Good morning, everyone. A little loud, huh? I'd like to thank Emerson for the invitation to come to your beautiful country, Israel. It's a very great honor for the association to be here, and we look forward to conversations after this. My name is Keith Rupnik. I work for the International Association of Information Technology Asset Managers. We couldn't have picked a shorter name. If you're wondering how we pronounce this, we pronounce it IAITAM, because we want to confuse everyone between IAITAM and IAITAM. So we answer to both. We're a membership-based organization. So we have people, individuals, organizations, and companies that provide solutions to IT asset management practitioners. We were founded in 2002, started teaching CSAM as one of our first courses, Certified Software Asset Management, and people looked at us like we were crazy back then. It's grown, it's matured, it's pretty amazing. Offers individual certifications in multiple disciplines of IT asset management, certified in over 140 different countries, world's only documented ITAM architecture for the program, and we host an annual conference and exhibition. Perhaps one of the most important things is we're vendor neutral. So we do not endorse anybody's products or anybody's services. We focus on the processes, we focus on roles. We focus on policies that make up the IT asset management program. So, one of the things that, obviously a rhetorical question, but how important is software to your organization? And it's hard to find any organization out there today that doesn't depend on IT. I mean, imagine running your business without IT. Forget about it, it's not going to happen. You have to have IT. I mean, I've had people, executives complain that they're spending millions of dollars on IT, and I can tell you it's very easy to cut those costs. Just turn the switch off. But that's not going to do your business very, very good, is it? You have to have it. So the other thing that we find extremely strange is that companies will have manufacturing, they'll have vehicle fleets, they'll have buildings. They have all these assets that they manage, and they've been managing them for some period of time. But when it comes to IT, it's like, wait a second, that's different. We can't do that. It's not the same. Well, it is the same. So the next question is, are you managing your software as a business asset? Now, you're not going to be able to manage it the same way you would manage a vehicle or a production machine or a building. It is different. It is more complicated. But it is still a critical business asset to your organization. And then the next and final piece here, is it a core competency? Most organizations we run into, we'll do SAM when we have to. The auditor shows up. We've had a security breach. We have to cut 10% from an IT budget this year. Or we just found out that we have to pay an extra $1 million for licensing. Then it becomes an issue. So it's a very reactive. Now, there's a lot of things going on in industry globally, and the term SAM has really come on in the past probably 2, maybe 3 years. At the association, we see SAM as a subset of IT asset management. And the vendors, with Emerson here, they certainly understand the importance of hardware because licensing, of course, can be very dependent on the configuration of the hardware. But SAM plus ITAM, for hardware asset management is equal to IT asset management. Because, let's face it, the software lives on hardware. The hardware configuration impacts the licensing requirements. We want to know where that hardware is at, so it has a physical location. Part of the challenges with software that people need to understand is it's something that you can inventory, but it's tied to a piece of hardware, or a virtual machine which is tied to a piece of hardware. So it becomes extremely important that you understand your hardware and where that is living in its configuration, because that is going to impact your software asset management. So software is a business asset, but it's different. And we've spent a lot of time, we being an association, in meetings with executives explaining this. The common comment we'll hear during an audit situation from an executive is, well, I own the software, I bought it. It's mine, I can do whatever I want. And it's the furthest thing from the truth. You bought something that gave you the right to use it. It's an entitlement. You buy a book at a bookstore, you read the book, you give it to your neighbor, no harm, no foul. You buy a piece of software to do your taxes, hand it to your neighbor so that they can do their taxes. Chances are there's harm and foul. You've done something that was non-compliant. So software is this intellectual property protected by international copyright laws, of which Israel is part of the Berne Agreement. So those copyright laws give the publishers, the Microsofts, the Oracles, the legal right to audit you. So one of the questions you need to ask yourself is, does my executive management, does my organization understand this thing called copyright and how it impacts software? One of the things that we also advocate strongly is education and communication within your organization. And one of those topics is copyright law. Technology makes it very, very simple and very easy to violate copyright law. And a lot of times what you'll find is people say, well, the computer let me do it, so it must be okay. Well, the computer lets you do it, but the computer doesn't understand copyright law either. Good luck educating it. So it's up to the individuals and the people. Now, what does the S stand for in software, in SAM? So traditionally, it's been stood for software, of course, but now it also stands for subscription. You know, Darryl was talking about the cloud. So you have to do subscription asset management, and one of the questions we get from people is, well, if I go to the cloud, I don't have to worry about SAM, do I? Wrong. Furthest from the truth. SAM becomes exceedingly more difficult in the cloud than if you're hosting your own software because of the tools and the ability to see what's being used and how it's being used. So realize that software/subscription asset management, if you're going into the cloud environment, you have to keep in mind that the things are going to change, that the tools are going to be different in that environment. SAM's a buzzword now. I don't know about you guys, but I was so sick and tired of hearing about cloud. Cloud, 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 cloud. And SAM is becoming that buzzword as well. So you got to make certain your partners understand the full context of software asset management and the scope of it. And what is that scope of software asset management? So people will ask us, Keith, do I have to manage all the software titles on my network? So my question to them is, well, do you want to be compliant? Do you want to follow the rules of the law? Well, yes, we do, Keith. Well, then, yes, you do have to manage all of it. Okay, so that's the textbook answer. Pretty easy. Reality, nobody's doing it. Think about the number of software titles that you have on your network. I run into organizations that have told me we have 15,000 software titles on our network. 15,000. Or 500, or 800, or 1,000. That's a significant number of software titles. Those are unique titles, folks. How do you manage all of those? So what people are doing is they're starting out small. They're starting out with the titles that make sense, the Microsofts, the Oracles, the IBMs. And they have this managed software library, and they start growing that library. During that period of time, what you're doing is creating processes and policies and education and communication to get to an understanding of how you're supposed to manage the software. Now, is SAM, what is it in terms of, is it a project? Well, could be one of the worst things you can think of is SAM as a project. Certainly your initiatives are going to consist of projects. But to be a project would suggest that there's a beginning and an end. Hopefully there's the end to the project. But you know, that is too finite of a time frame. Is it a department? Well, certainly you have people that are going to help you manage the software asset management pieces to it. You need that ownership. So there is a department piece to it. Now, is it a program? And by a program, that may have a different meaning or context in America as it does in some other countries. But this is a program meaning that it doesn't end. As long as you own software or subscriptions, you have SAM. It's not going away, folks. You can't hide from it. It's there. Also, SAM spans the entire horizontally across your organizations. Anyone that touches an IT asset is part of your program. Anyone. That includes the guy at the dock that receives the servers or the desktop computers and puts them somewhere. All of those individuals are part of your program, minimally by having to follow policies related to software asset management. And again, if you go back to the discussion on copyright laws and the younger generations and the ability to violate copyright is so easy, you owe them the explanation as to what and why copyright is important to them and to the organization as well. Now, at the association, we break things down into 3 different business drivers: efficiencies, financial, and risk. Now, the efficiencies come in an environment where you have controls over that environment. Think order fulfillment, for example. How long does it take for a user who makes a request for Visio, for example, to be installed to actually get it installed? Well, in some organizations without any type of order, you're looking at a couple, 2, 3 business days. Others, you're going to have it within a couple of hours. So that's part of that efficiency and also just the efficiency in the operations. Think about your help desk or your service desk. Your organization currently has deployed 3 different versions of Microsoft Office, for example. How hard is it for your help desk to support 3 different versions of Microsoft Office? How hard is it for them to talk to the end user when they say to the end user, what version of Office are you running? And the user's going to say, Word. Okay. So a lot of efficiencies can be gained through software asset management. I'm going to spend more time on the financial and the risk mitigation because I think there's some areas in there that may be of more interest to you. We're going to be looking at the hard and soft dollars, total cost of ownership, return on investment, cost avoidance, and in risk, we're going to talk about audit, and as Daryl pointed out, security. So here's just some examples that we have gotten. Fortune 500 company consolidates portfolio from 150 to 65 applications, saving $2.5 million annually. Okay. Sallie Mae saved $5 million on software costs. Software consolidation was 12% maintenance reduction. U.S. Petroleum Company saved $1.25 million by eliminating 76 products no longer used or underutilized. Another organization identified applications no longer being used but were under a maintenance contract, result $400,000 in savings over 5 years of the contract. Those are real numbers. I want you to also notice that, of all the bullets, there's only one organization named there. People ask us often, we need, what's the proof, Keith? I got to take to my executive. Well, how many of you out there in your organization would raise your hand enthusiastically to announce these savings? Nobody wants to come out to the shareholders or to the customers and say, yeah, we were blowing $2.5 million because we weren't managing things. There's a lot of great stories out there, but very few people are going to be willing to put their name to it. So that's where people rely on organizations such as myself and what Daryl was pointing here as that information. Nobody wants to come out with it. Now, hard dollar versus soft dollar. America is finance driven. My first quality training class many years ago, everything had to be hard dollar. We were told, you want to make process improvements? Fine, no problem. But you have to put a savings to it. We want to know how much you're going to save. But quality, and when it comes to asset management, you're looking at both hard and soft. So hard dollar savings is something that you can quantify. Those examples on the previous screen are a perfect example of hard dollar savings. But soft dollar savings, now those are something different. Those are something that are difficult to quantify, yet we know. Dual monitors, big trend. Everyone gets 2 monitors. Everyone I talk to that has that as a new standard now, I say, what was the return on investment? Nobody measured it. You just know. You got 2 monitors. You can get twice as much done, maybe. Not necessarily true. But also soft dollars. I mentioned the savings at help desk environment. Well, there's a financial benefit there, certainly in hard, but also in soft. Because now, instead of having 3 different versions of Microsoft Office, you've got one version. And help desk is able to be trained and educated. Turnover usually is quite high on the help desk, so training is an issue. Making certain people have the right machine to support the right software is another example. Is the performance there? So soft dollars are just as important. Now, total cost of ownership. I have yet been able to run into anyone who could accurately tell me total cost of ownership for deploying a desktop or a laptop. I've had 2 people I've been working with the association and teaching for 8 or 9 years now. I've had 2 different people say to me, both interesting, the same numbers, $5,000 a year for a desktop, $6,000 a year for a laptop. So when I started talking to them about those costs, they quickly broke down to basically just a few numbers were involved in that calculation. And when I say total cost of ownership, I'm not talking about buying the PC. I'm talking about the PC, the hardware, the software, maintenance agreements, and then the network behind it. The firewalls, the servers, all of that. How much does it cost to deploy a desktop computer? How much does it cost to deploy a laptop? Nobody knows. Nobody really knows. And it's kind of weird, in my opinion. I've been involved in multiple other industries where very similar situation, they have to know. The thing that interests me about the cloud is how are they going to be profitable in that business model? Now, I can tell you the subscription model is a beautiful model. You get more and more people, you have lower costs, you increase your subscription, it's all about the base. Right now, things are very competitive in the cloud. So prices are low. But when the winners are announced, there's going to be pressure. When the population density, when you start getting market saturation, there's going to be pressure on squeezing more profitability, more revenue out of existing customers. Then things will change. So total cost of ownership is still something that people don't have their hands around. Think about it this way. Anytime someone touches an asset in your organization, it costs money. Simple question for people. How much money do you spend every year applying patches to your software? How many hours do you spend applying patches to your software? Do you have that number? Do you understand that? And then what are you doing about it? Are you asking those software publishers, hey, look, I spent half a man-year applying patches that are fixing problems you created that adds no value to my organization? Well, if you don't have that data, if you don't have that information, then you really don't know what that impact is. Next one, return on investment. And return on investment is kind of an interesting one because I've run into organizations, nonprofits, for example, who say we don't have ROI because we don't make money, we're nonprofit. Okay. But we're not talking about return on investment in terms of revenue from your customers. We're talking about a piece of software that's essentially sitting on a shelf collecting dust, not being used. If a license that you bought is sitting there collecting dust and not being used, why'd you buy it? The return on investment of a license that isn't installed is significantly lower than that of the same license that is installed and being used, right? Make sense? So return on investment, and of course that takes into consideration along with that total cost of ownership. And then one of my interesting topics, which if you want to get me emotional, catch me at break to talk about this one, cost avoidance. So organizations save something like $15 million over 18 months by redeploying assets. So every time they redeployed an asset, software or hardware, they said, instead of buying it new, we saved that money for the organization. So we redeployed a desktop computer. It would have cost us $600 to buy a new one, so we saved the company $600 by redeploying. They got very, very excited about the number because it grew quite large. Went over to finance and said, hey, finance, we saved you guys $14 million. over 18 months. And finance is like, wow, that's great. Excellent. How'd you do it? Well, this is how we do it. Oh, wait, that's cost avoidance. We don't care. We don't measure that. So the question I have for you to ask yourself in your organization, how is cost avoidance measured, tracked, respected? Does anybody care? They should. Because that is something that we can certainly impact greatly with the appropriate software asset management. Huge savings there through reuse. You dispose of a hardware asset, do you harvest the software, for example? Or do you just throw the software out with it? There are organizations that do that. And then say to me, well, we know that we're going to pass an audit because we're well over licensed. Not necessarily. So, good metric, but how's it viewed in your organization? Somebody cares about it. Somebody should care about it. Risk mitigation, software audits. So, first of all, who are the biggest threats? And Daryl mentioned them. We're pretty much in line with that. IBM, Microsoft, Oracle, Adobe. One that wasn't on your list I would add is Autodesk, which has a smaller market, niche market, but Autodesk is really nasty. But the other third parties are two organizations that are global called BSA, Business Software Alliance, and SIIA, Software Industry and Information Association. The BSA has a contract essentially with the major publishers to be able to come in and audit you on the behalf of the Microsofts. And these guys, when they come into your business, they don't care about your relationship. In fact, they were created for that sole purpose. They're in there solely to get as much money out of you as possible. And you can go to your vendor and say, hey, can you guys tell these guys to back off? And the vendor's going to sit there and say, no, I can't. Because that's their own business. That's what they do. That's how they make money. So BSA, SIIA, and of course those publishers. Remember when I was talking about the scope of SAM, what Daryl mentioned, what I was mentioning here, do you have that software in your organization? Where should you start? Where can you start your software asset management? $1 billion revenue stream. Billion with a B. That's how much one publisher makes every year from software audits. Anybody would like that part of that revenue? Anybody? $1 billion. Now, what does that tell you? Well, it tells me this, that in that organization, there is a business or a group, a department that has profit and loss responsibility. And anytime legal or somebody else in the organization says, you know what, let's make licensing easier, let's make it simpler, that department is sitting there saying, wait a second, how are you going to make up the $1 billion shortfall in our revenue? So what we have seen as a trend is other software publishers are catching on to this. There's a revenue stream there. There's a revenue stream from audits. So if there's a revenue stream from audits and organizations are making that money, then where's the motivation for them to make licensing simpler for you? Sorry, there isn't. IBM announced a couple of years ago, every 2 years, they're going to audit their customers, at least. Microsoft, we know, does at least one audit every day, usually through their partners. So the revenue stream is there, and it's unfortunate. How many people here have read a software licensing agreement? Read it. It's fun. Having trouble sleeping at night? Download a licensing agreement. Start reading it. It doesn't make sense. There's contradictions. There's things that are ambiguous. It's not clear. So how are you supposed to manage something to this letter of this quote-unquote law when I can't even interpret it and understand it myself? Well, that's why you got organizations over here to help you with that complexity, certainly. But one of the things we advocate strongly and have been advocating since our existence is let's make licensing clear. You know, we're very much against, of course, pirating, but not pro auditing for the sake of making a revenue stream like this organization does and others are doing it. So when you're looking at software audits, then you have the costs to your organization. Well, you have the true-ups. Okay, so I was under licensed by X amount. So there's a cost there. Chances are you're going to pay list price. Your negotiating position there is pretty much done. Fines. So one of the first things I did for the association, one of our members got into trouble, and law firm, 200 lawyers. Their first reaction was they were going to take it to the US Supreme Court. They had no right doing this, and of course that lost that battle. But they paid $700,000 in fines, just fines, to SIIA. Nothing to do with the true-up costs or the infrastructure. For 9 months, their Microsoft Office sat there without an update on every single computer. Think about that from a security standpoint. Try telling your IT security folks, sorry, you can't update this application. We're in a lawsuit right now. It's evidence. We can't corrupt it. Lost productivity. How many people here have an IT department where on their schedule they have an audit project? Not current because they're doing an audit, but planned. What value does an audit add to your organization? Nothing. It's just part of doing business. And then, of course, damage to the organization's reputation. There's trial by jury, there's trial by public opinion. Those are the two. And usually the public opinion can be much more costly. Cyber attacks. Cyber attack costs company $400 billion every year, Fortune magazine. The average annual cost of responding to cyber attacks was $12.7 million, up 96% over the previous 5 years. Average cost of cyber attacks doubles to 1.46 million pounds. You know, you can't do IT security without software asset management. You can't. IT security is a stopgap measure. It's reactive. ITAM and IT security in the majority of organizations are very close partners. We share very similar objectives. Where is it? Who's using it? How did it get there? And why is it there? Remember I talked about in the previous slide, they reduced the number of applications? Department of Navy went from 800 applications on their network to 40. You cannot secure what you don't know you have. Now, think of this. There's a building with one door in it, and you've been asked to secure that building. Shouldn't be that hard of a job, should it? One way in, one way out. Now, add 2 doors to that building. Twice as much work. Add 800 doors to the building. Building with more entryways, more difficult to secure, right? Every application is a doorway into your network. So why do you have it? Maybe your business requires it. That's fine. We're not judging you based on the number of applications you have in your network. We're judging you based on do you understand why you have those applications. So when Department of Navy went from 800 to 40 applications, they did their IT security a great favor. Because instead of monitoring 800 applications, they had 40 now. And it's not just watching ports and seeing traffic flying back and forth. Also, it's applying software patches. So now they had 40 to apply patches to instead of 800, which led then to the ownership piece too, because I've had security guys say to me, I got this application sitting on the network, I don't know whose it is. It hasn't been patched for 12 months, and there's patches out there. So SEC becomes extremely important. Again, you cannot do IT security without doing asset management, folks. You can't. Now, you want to call it IT security? I don't care. We've had people start their ITAM programs, go nowhere, and then walked over to IT Sec and say, this is what I want to do, and IT Sec says, you're in. Fine. We don't care. But the capability and the functionality that, the responsibility of the asset manager is extremely valuable to the organization. So what's going on there around the world? Well, US, Canada are certainly maturing. If you go from a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most mature, the majority of organizations out there are between a 1 and a 2. I've had people tell me I'm a 3, I'm a 4. After talking to them for a while, I come to the conclusion that the individuals are 3s and 4s, the program is a 1 or 2. In other words, if those people quit the company tomorrow, their program is going to be back to a 1. So you also have to be aware of that. Central South America, early adoption at best. One of the conversations I had with one of our partners in Central America is they can't even afford the software right now to buy it outright. So they buy a copy of it. Western Europe is again evolving and certainly on the foundation because ITSM is huge in Western Europe. Eastern Europe is emerging. Israel is emerging. I'm being polite, I think, when I say Asia is challenged. They are challenged to understand copyright. Again, I'm being polite, I think. Africa is mixed, challenge to emergency. Australia is maturing, certainly, and I don't have a clue about Antarctica. There's a rumor that the penguins are being used to duplicate and steal software, but that hasn't been substantiated. So that's pretty much it around the world. A lot of people are in the same boat, if you will. They're still trying to get, and why is this? And I'm going to use America time frame here, history, but in the 1970s, asset management was easy. You had this thing called a mainframe computer. It sat on a platform. You had access control to it. There were the guys wearing polyester pants and clip-on ties, white shirts, and the pocket protectors. Very weird people. To do physical inventory was easy. You walked into the mainframe, you opened up the door, one closed it, right? You had centralized computing. You had these dumb terminals or smart terminals. Anyone who could pick it up and carry it out to the car without breaking their back or having a heart attack, more power to them. Although looking back, we should have all done it because of the amount of gold that is in those things. Software was centralized. Everything was centralized. And then some idiot came along and created the personal computer. And I say that affectionately. And that was the beginning of the end. All the best practices, all the discipline from the mainframe guys didn't go along with the technology. You hit the beginning of the fracturing of IT. That PC. The first PC I worked on was $26,000. Intel 286. So, big, powerful stuff. Then you had the laptop, and you had the mobile computers as well. Executive management responsibility. Understand what ITAM is and SAM. Own it. Somebody at the executive level has to own IT asset management and SAM. Empower it. They have to create a department or a group to administer the program. And then go back to doing what they were doing before. Rarely do you find an executive that has ITAM and SAM on their daily agenda, unless they're under an audit or cyber attack. So that is it. Now, one of my favorite quotes, you can't talk your way out of what you behaved yourself into. So you get a software audit. You're under license by 20%. You're not going to talk your way out of it, guys. You behaved your way into it. Okay? It's a behavior. Asset management's got to become part of the culture of your organization. Just like in America, hospital systems, HIPAA, which is the Health Information Act for privacy. It has to be part of that culture. Reactive SAM does cost more, and I'd be more than happy to talk about that on break. It has to be viewed as a program horizontally across the organization. Executive management support is everything. You don't have it, then you're going to have to clean up whatever you can in your own little corner of the world. It's worth still doing, believe me, because you'll be there when it's really needed. ITAM's not a sprint or a marathon. That would imply there's an end game. Again, we're going to be using software for quite a long time from here on out. So it's a culture. It has to be ingrained. People have to talk about it. You have to communicate and educate. All right, thank you very much. If there's any questions, I don't know if we have time for that. Thank you.